Hello.
Hi, Mario. Hi, Abe. We're on Kuf Ches, 108.
Kufras. Thank you.
Hi, Abe. Long time no
Hello.
see.
Yeah, back home.
You were in
Welcome
Hong
back.
Kong?
Yeah.
Okay, we're deep in our Basar B'chol of Sugya, Mishnah and Kuf Ches. Tipas Cholov Shanofla Chaticha. You have a drop of milk that fell on a piece of meat. There are two ways of learning. Rashi and Tosfos will learn Rashi's way. Tosfos learns that the piece of meat is completely outside of the pot. Rashi learns that part of it is submerged into the pot itself, and part of it is not. Then, im yesh benoisen tam chaticha, let's say this slice of meat has only 30 times the volume of the drop of milk. Well, then there's no bittul. It's going to be noisen tam. That slice will have the flavor of the milk. So the din is osir. We're talking about a case
Ernie,
where the pot has not been stirred.
the
Yes,
sound again.
yes.
The sound is breaking.
Okay.
Maybe on the other side of the table.
Well, that's where I went yesterday. It seemed to be better.
Yeah. What, whatever reason.
Okay. So that piece will become prohibited. The Rishonim discussed that if if the piece was submerged completely, then you could take into account the sauce, the other slices, etc. That's why Rashi is learning that this piece is completely sitting up with just a little bit in the sauce. Rashi says, "Bosa chaticha klomer she'ein ba'osa chaticha levad hashishim levad latipa." Miyad neser chaticha, the slice becomes prohibited. And this Mishnah Rashi tells us, "B'shar chatichas dikter lo ayri." When it says osir, it's not talking about the other pieces; it's talking about just that piece. And then we're going to see whether this piece later on will prohibit the remaining slices in the pot. If nier esakdera, if he didn't give it right away when the drop of milk dropped on the piece, he stirred it, and that slice itself didn't have the opportunity to absorb the flavor of the milk. Rather, it got absorbed by the whole pot. Then, im yeshba b'noisen tam bosa kedera, if there's 60 times in the other slices of meat and in the sauce to be mavatal that drop of, if there's not enough, if there's not 60, so you could taste that flavor usher, but if there was 60, it would be permitted. That's what the Mishnah says. Amra, by a time of Lomamashra deraisa. We're now into the sugya of Tama Ke'ikr. When there is some kind of prohibited flavor in something, that alone is like the prohibited thing is there itself. Now, is that midaraisa or is that midarabana? Rabbi wants to say it's daraisa. Because if it's only the flavor is only prohibited midrabanan, mibasar b'cholav my time lo gamrinon. So the problem is when you cook meat with milk, what do you have there? You have the flavor of the milk. Now, why don't we learn to all other prohibitions like basar b'cholav? It's just a flavor, and yet it's usher. You know why? Because the chidushu. Basar b'cholav is a chidush. Rashi says, the basar b'cholav hu elishma because both items individually are permitted. Basar is permitted and cholav is permitted. That's number one. Number two, it's not just when you eat basar b'cholav, even when you cook basar b'cholav, it's prohibited. So for those reasons, we don't learn the criteria of basar b'cholav to other prohibitions. Now, in ichudushu afagav deleka nois and tam nami, even if it is a chidush, then it's still prohibited because you cooked it together, even if there was no necessarily flavor there. So that's why Bai learns that the flavor prohibition must be doraisa. Amalei Rava, no. It is a chidush, but derech bishul asr Torah. The only time basar b'cholav is prohibited is when you cook it. That's the special chidush of basar b'cholav. Amar Rav, kiven shnosan tam chaticha. We have a special din called chaticha nasan avela chanat. If the drop of milk fell into the piece of meat, and there wasn't 60 in that piece of meat, that whole piece of meat not just becomes chaticha atzma nasas avela. That whole piece becomes asur. So if the milk was 1 ounce, but now the piece of meat was 10 ounces, and now it has absorbed flavor, you have to mevatel 60 times the 10 ounces, because that whole piece becomes prohibited. Not only that, according to Rabbi Yehuda, you have a piece of meat with other piece of meat. That's min b'mino. And according to Rabbi Yehuda, min b'mino is not batel. So the whole thing would become prohibited. Rav Keman Amar L'Shmaitza. Who is Rav saying this like? Rabbi Yehuda. Damar min b'mina lo batel. So lema pliga de Rava. Does that mean that Rav argues with Rav Damar Rava? Ksav Rabbi Yehuda. Kolshu minu mino v'davar acher. When there's a third item, like the sauce, or like water that's being cooked in there. Salek esmino. Remove the meat. Kamisha eno, as if it's not there. If there's 60 times as much sauce or water, then you have min v'she'eno mino, and it should nullify. If the water was very thin, then there would be bittul. It's thick, so it's like the meat itself. So there is no sort of non-mino to say salek, to remove it. It ends up, it's min b'mino. Min b'mino is no bottle according to Rabbi Yehuda. Okay, Mike Sommer. What really does Rav hold? Ik Sommer efshar l'sochato muter. When you have that prohibited piece of where the milk fell onto the meat, and let's say you had 60 times amount of meat in the pot, and it nullifies. Does the milk that was absorbed in that first piece of meat leave the original piece, and we say that the original piece can be eaten? Well, then what is the purpose of saying chaticha may nasas nevela? If the piece becomes nevela, it becomes prohibited forever. Must be ksavar efshar l'socha to aser. Even if there was the ability to nullify that piece of milk in 60 pieces, you wouldn't be able to withdraw it from the original piece of meat. It would remain prohibited. And we're going to see that that's the correct understanding of Rav, the Itmar. Rav Chanin, Rav Yechon, the Amri, Efshar l'socha to aser. Even if there is 60 times the amount to nullify, we say that the original piece remains aser. Shmuel Reish Lakish, the Amri Efshar l'socha to muter. They say no. If there's 60 times that piece, the milk that was in the original piece leaves it, and the original piece is permitted. Freit the Gemara v'savar Rav efshar l'socha to aser. Does he say that the original piece remains prohibited? Vayitmar. Kazayas basar shenafal l'soch yorash shel cholav. You have a kazayas of meat that fell into a huge cauldron of milk, and it has enough to be mevatel the kazayas basar. Amar Rav. The basar asr, the piece of meat remains asr, because the piece of meat absorbed the flavor of the milk. Chalav mutter, the meat flavor that was in the milk became nullified because it was 60 times the amount of meat. So, but the basar remains prohibited. But if you say there's nullification, the prohibition leaves the original piece, chalav amay mutter. Or why would we, if that meat flavor came out of the piece of meat, why would the milk be permitted? The flavor coming out would be chalav nevelu. It would be absorbing a basar b'chalav flavor. So clearly it doesn't come out. Really, even if there is bittul, the original piece remains prohibited. Shiny awesome. Thereby the milk. Don't cook a kid in its mother milk. It's not the milk that became asr, it's the meat. The Savar Rav Gdi Asra Tarvalo Cholav. V'ha'itmar. Chatzi zayis basar. Chatzi zayis cholav. You had half a kazayis basar. Half a kazayis milk. Shebishlan zimza, you cooked it together. Amar of loikal echilaso. You get malchus for eating it. But ein a lokal bishulo. You don't get malchus for cooking it. He didn't cook the proper amount. Isak Gdi Asra Tarvalo Cholav. If the Torah only asred the gedi, not the milk, then achila my loika. Why should he get malchus? Chatzi shirhu, and chatzi shir is asr, but minat Torah, but we don't get malchus for it. Obviously, Rav says that the milk was prohibited like the meat. El olam ksav Rav cholav nami asr. V'hoch ma'eskinon kigon shenafal asoch yor roisachas. This is a special case where the meat fell into a boiling pot of milk. We have a principle. Mivla bala miflit lo pala. The piece of meat absorbed the milk, but while it's boiling, it could not discharge that flavor back into the pot of milk. Because while it's boiling, it's occupied only with one function, absorption, not in putting it out. Yeah, but when it stops boiling, it will put back that flavor back into the milk. How can Rav say that the milk is permitted? And for the Gemara, Kishakodim the Silka, he removed it before the pot stopped boiling. So there was no meat flavor to go into the milk. Gufa. Chatzi zayis basar v'chatzi zayis cholav sheboshon zem zeh. Amarav loik al achiloso. You get malchus for eating it, but vein loik al achiloso. I don't understand, says the Gemara of Shach. If they combine half a kazayis to half a kazayis to a full kazayis to make you so you get malchus, abishul nami lilki. So why shouldn't you get malchus for cooking it? And he lo mitzdarf nachila nami lo lilki. If there's no itzdarf, you shouldn't get malchus for eating it. Lo lo mitzdarfi ukeba miyara gedoyla. When he gets malchus, these two half a kazayis came from a large pot where there was a kazayis of meat and a kazayis of milk cooking there. So there was already basar b'chala. But v'levi omer af loik el bishula. Not only do you get malchus for eating it, you get malchus for cooking it. V'chein tan levi kishem shaloik al achilasu kach loik al bishulo uveiza bishul omru b'bishul shachem oiklen oso machmas bishulo. People, even non-Jews, would eat it to the level that you're cooking it. Means it was fully cooked. Means further cooking would make it not edible. But people will eat it. Now this issue of does the piece that became asr, can it become mutter once the flavor leaves it by bittul? This issue of efshar l'soicha to atzmo tanoi. It's machlekes tanoi, the Tanya. Tipas cholav shenafal achaticha. Drop of milk fell on a piece of meat. Kivin shenosla tam b'chaticha. Once that piece of meat has the flavor, the piece becomes asr. Because we said, according to Rabbi Yehuda, Mipnei shein mina de Rabbi Yehuda, min b'min is eino batel. So there's no bittul. Chacham omrim, ad shetiten tabaroto v'kifa v'chatichos. No. You can include the soup, the sediments, the meat, everything, in order to mevatel the piece of milk, the drop of milk. And even if there was enough milk that the flavor would go into the piece alone, the original piece remains mutter, because that drop sort of got subsumed by the rest of the pot. And Rebbe explains, near in the Rabbi Yehuda b'shelo near. It's usher when you don't stir it, and you didn't cover it for shelo kisa. However, v'divrei chachamim b'kishenir v'kisa, when you stirred it and you covered it, so that milk gets dispersed throughout the whole pot, and that's why 60 times the drop of milk will nullify it. Now, what does it mean? My no lo near v'lo kisa. Ileman lo near klal v'lo kisa klal. You didn't cover it at all. So miv labola miflet lopolat. Why do you say it only absorbed and didn't put out its flavor to the other pieces? Ela lo near betchila lo besof. You didn't stir it initially, and therefore the piece got the flavor of the milk, but he stirred it. Or lo kisa betchila lo besof. You didn't cover it, but you covered it at the end. So it did. The flavor of the milk got nullified by everything else in the pot. But amai habol of a hapola. Who cares that the original slice absorbed the milk? It put it out, and it was nullified by the majority. Obviously, the original piece remains prohibited. Why? Ksavar efshel l'seicha to aser. Rebbe seems to hold, even though the potential is there for that flavor of the milk to come out, the original chaticha becomes aser. That's why we have the concept of chanan, chaticha nasa neveh. Okay, we'll stop here. Tomorrow 7, and then the tzorba at 8. I'm sorry. We have a yard site. Tomorrow is Marsha Teich. We're making a yard site for Teichman. So I'm going to have to move the tzorba to a different day. I'm not sure yet, because Wednesday night I have something else. I have a Sheva bracha, so we'll have to see what happens with tzorba this week. Let's learn the daf at 5 o'clock. Okay? 5 o'clock. That way at least we get the daf in.
Okay.
I'll let you know, Mario, later on about the tzorba.